A very warm welcome to everybody. I'm Anna Taylor, the Executive Director at the Food Foundation. We're really thrilled that you've all joined us today online for our discussion about the third of the Food Foundation's State of the Food Industry report. This is one of our two major publications that we do annually to try and assess the direction of travel with respect to creating a food system which is going to support both health and environmental outcomes. And I'm really thrilled today that we have Fran, Haycock and Julie Owst with us to join our panel to discuss the report. And of course, Rebecca, who leads the team that has produced the report and who's going to be able to talk us through it all. We're hoping that you're going to come away with three big messages from today's discussion. The first is, I think will come out very strongly from what Rebecca says, is that we really need a clear direction of travel to be set out by government in order to create the right incentives around the food industry to deliver some of these outcomes that we're seeking. The second is that there are some companies that are clearly doing better than others. They're really trying to move the needle on some of these issues, but the lack of a level playing field is holding them back. And linked to the first point, we really need to have government intervention to reduce some of that commercial risk and allow those companies to move further and faster and to obviously bring up the standard across the board. And then the third message is, I think will come out strongly from all the panel discussion, is that good data drives good decision making. And here we're seeing countless examples of where businesses are asking the right questions of their data and using that to inform better decision making. And in turn, we'd really like to see the government make a move and require companies to report just a small set of data that would tell us whether or not sales are moving in the right direction in support of health and environmental outcomes. So those are the three things we're hoping you're going to hear. We're going to start with Rebecca, who will talk us through the report, and then we'll move on to hear from Fran and Julie. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Anna. I'll just wait whilst the slides get loaded, but it's fab to have so many of you here with us today. So as Anna said, this is the third year we've produced the State of the Nation's Food Industry Report. If you could just move on through the slides. So this is year three. We affectionately call her Sophie. And basically what this report is doing is it's tracking industry progress towards healthy and sustainable diets. So we look within this report at who is performing really well, and also where does improvement need to be made, and what do both businesses and the government need to be doing to really support us to sort of shift the dial and move the market towards the outcomes we want to see here. Next slide, please. So just a bit more context in terms of what we did and what the report covers. So we focus on major UK food businesses, and historically we've mostly looked at food retail and out-of-home food service within this report. But this year, for the first time, we've also looked at manufacturers in recognition of the really key role they play in the sort of overall food environment jigsaw puzzle. And there's 11 metrics or sort of chapters within the report, and they're looking across 4 themes. And these themes are really covering those sorts of pillars that are going to be really key for ensuring that everybody can access and afford a healthy and sustainable diet. So we look at standards, which is really all about transparency and accountability within industry, affordability, availability, and appeal. And a lot of what's in the report is based on findings of plating up progress. And I think Ros has dropped a URL into the chat with a link to the dashboard, which has also been updated this week. And what plating up progress does is we look at 36 businesses across those different sectors, and we're benchmarking them against a very holistic set of sustainability and health metrics, and you can look in quite a lot of detail on that dashboard in terms of how individual companies and different sectors are performing there. And just also to add a big thank you to everybody that we worked with on this report. It really is a big process. So we've worked with academic partners and civil society organisations as well. So big thanks to everybody involved. Next slide, please. So just to start, what I'm going to do now is just walk through some of the key findings, but I should stress that there is an awful lot of detail in the report. So this is very much just scratching the surface. So I'd urge all of you who are finding this interesting to have a kind of proper look at the report. But I think one of the really key findings for us this year is related to standard setting. And what we've done within this section of the report is we look at what businesses are disclosing transparent data in terms of what proportion of their sales are coming from healthier foods versus less healthy or age versus foods, fruit and veg, and protein disclosure. So what proportion of protein sales are coming from animal protein versus plant protein, because we see these three areas as being really key to unlocking kind of healthy and sustainable diets more generally. So we're looking at data disclosure, and then we're also looking at whether companies are then setting targets to actually look at increasing the proportion of sales coming from those three different categories. And for the first time this year, we've also looked in much more detail at the climate metrics that we assess as part of Plating Up Progress. So we've really, if you excuse the pun, zeroed in on net zero disclosure and target setting, and also scope 3 disclosure and target setting. And apologies if this is such a blindingly obvious to a lot of you on the call, but just to give a bit more explanation of why we see scope 3 as really being key. For food businesses, the vast majority of greenhouse gas emissions are associated with scope 3 emissions as opposed to 1 and 2. So it's about 90 to 95% of greenhouse gas emissions are driven by scope 3. And scope 3 emissions really capture the carbon footprint that's associated with the kind of products and the food that businesses are selling. So those kind of indirect emissions as opposed to sort of generated by direct operations. The majority of scope 3 emissions when it comes to food companies will be driven by livestock production and consumption. So if we're going to hit net zero in the food industry, we need to be acting on scope 3. And if we're going to be reducing scope 3 emissions, then we need to be thinking about how we reduce meat and dairy products within our diets. So there's a whole section looking at that. We've also looked at board accountability using data from ATNI's very recent global index, which came out last week. And for the first time, we've looked at corporate lobbying. And what we find within this section is that even though there is progress happening, this is really not happening at the scale or the speed that it needs to be. And so there's a really urgent need for the government to intervene, set those standards and those incentives for businesses, and make sure that there is a level playing field here for standards across the board. And what we found this year is that of all the 36 companies that we assess, just 1 in 4 has a healthy sales target and discloses data on that. Actually, in the kind of voluntary environment we find ourselves in, that is, you could say that is encouraging because that is happening. But I think when you actually look across the different sectors, it is quite concerning to see there's a real gap opening up here between progressive companies who are kind of leading the way here and those that aren't, because there's no kind of mandatory or kind of real incentive for them to do so. So over the past year, we've seen particularly the casual dining sector and quick service restaurants, as fast food outlets, make no progress in terms of disclosing data and setting targets. So what you're seeing is that the out-of-home sector as a whole is now really lagging behind, particularly retailers and manufacturers. So that's why there's a real need for the government to act. And we think starting with mandatory reporting is a good place to start. Next slide, please. And I think one of the things that came out actually quite clearly this year in terms of comparing and contrasting climate disclosure and target setting against health is you can see there's a big gap opening up here. So what this graph shows is across those different sectors we look at, who is disclosing data and who is setting targets. And you can see that across the board, there's really good, there's a real shift towards disclosing data and setting targets for climate change. But the same is not true when it comes to food. you can see that there's much less progress being made. So we've got to ask ourselves, if we can do it for climate, why is this not happening for health and food? Next slide, please. And our hypothesis here is that really this widening gap is being driven by the kind of difference in terms of what is being asked by governments of businesses to report on. So over the last couple of years, we've seen a real kind of upsurge in the number of kind of government-led, often mandated reporting requirements of businesses to disclose what their environmental impact is. So you've had things like the CSRD, the SECR. The same is just not true when it comes to food. So we were very encouraged by the progress that the Food Data Transparency Partnership, which was making. And the FDDP was really set up to get a consistent and standardized set of metrics for companies to report back on when it comes to health. But this is sort of it's been very stop-start over the past couple of years. It's ground to a bit of a halt since the election was called. And so we're still very much in a bit of a limbo when it comes to healthy sales reporting. And in the absence of the FDDP being mandatory, or there being a mandatory requirement of businesses to disclose that data, there's really no kind of clarity for businesses. So we've seen a real slowing over the past few years in terms of businesses moving to disclose data and set healthy sales targets. So really what we'd like to see is both Scope 3 emissions data and healthy sales data being a requirement for businesses. So it needs to be put on a mandatory footing. And just to sort of dig down again into what we found in our analysis, you can see in this graph that actually, across the board, you've now got a good standard, you've got a good number of businesses with targets in place for reducing net zero and Scope 3. Definitely room for improvement in terms of actually then disclosing on Scope 3 emissions, which is the piece of the puzzle that we need to be able to really sort of track progress towards net zero. Next slide, please. But when you look at health, you can see it's a very different picture. So we're looking at exactly the same companies in the same sectors here, but you can see there's not very much happening, certainly in some sectors, in terms of disclosure and target setting. So just 9 businesses of the 36 we looked at have a sales-based target. And you can see in particular this gap opening up between certain sectors. So casual dining and quick service restaurants in particular performed quite poorly in this year's analysis. Next slide, please. There's also a real need for businesses to sort of move in terms of protein disclosure. And so what we're looking at with this graph is who is disclosing data and who has a target for the protein split. So it was fantastic. Just a few weeks ago, we saw Lidl GB become the first UK retailer to actually set a target for increasing their sale of plant protein as a proportion of total protein sales. But really, it's only Lidl and Compass at the minute that are doing so. And obviously, meat is a tricky topic. You quite quickly get into culture wars territory, but I don't think we should necessarily approach this in terms of thinking, oh, well, it can't possibly be done. Because I think what's really interesting is that when you actually look internationally, certainly in the EU, the UK is now lagging behind other UK retailers in terms of having protein disclosure and targets for shifting that protein split. So in the Netherlands in particular, most of the major retailers have moved to set protein targets, and they're now actually starting to see that filtering through into impacting on sales. Next slide, please. So moving on just to some of the other kind of key themes that came out of this year's report and analysis. So availability and affordability are both obviously kind of key drivers of food choice. And we have seen progress here, particularly around availability and those metrics this year. But I think still a lot of opportunity to go further and a need for that to happen faster. Next slide, please. So looking at some of our metrics that look at kind of plant-rich foods and plant-rich diets, I think what comes out this year is that overwhelmingly the default option for citizens is still a meaty one. And as I said, we know that, shifting to more plant-rich diets not only has environmental impacts, but if done in the right way, there's a lot of health benefits that could be reaped as well. So, there's a huge number of sustainable and health code benefits if we are going to shift towards more plant-rich diets. But what we found is that the default option is still a meaty one. So we looked at 6 of the largest UK supermarkets, and where their multi-buy or bog-off offers are going. And 1 in 5 are going towards meat and dairy products, with half of those offers on processed meat. So 10.6% of all bog-off deals are on processed meat, which has very sort of clear health risks associated with it before we even get to the environmental impact. And in contrast, just 5% of deals were on fruit and veg. So in terms of how the kind of scales are being weighted here, not really balanced in the way that we'd want them to be. When we also looked at the out-of-home sector, again, you can see that the vast majority of kind of main meals and options on menus are still kind of focused quite heavily around meaty dishes. So over half, 58% of main meals contain meat. There had been a positive kind of shift in the right direction here since the previous year's analysis, where it had been 62%. But not as fast as we need to see this pace of change happening. And actually, we found a kind of lack of financial incentives really for families to be choosing plant-rich options. So when we looked at 20 of the largest UK high street restaurant chains, none of them made their healthier or plant-based kids meal deals the cheapest ones. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to ramp up action in this space. Next slide, please. And just to kind of finish with another theme that came out, I think, of this year's report. So really the need to do more to support children's health. And I think when you think about groups that probably face some of the biggest barriers in terms of being able to access and afford healthy and sustainable diets, we know that low-income families in particular face particular challenges. And what we found this year is that we looked at TV ads for snack and confectionery products. So we were looking at those ads that were aired pre-watershed. So before the watershed is a period of time between 5:30 a.m. and 9 p.m, because let's hope kids are in bed by 9 p.m. And what we found is that actually over 80%, 49% of ads for snacks and confectionery were actually being aired before the watershed, so we can assume there are lots of kids in the audience, but just 5 companies were responsible for over 80% of those ads. And what came out really strongly to us was that actually all those 5 companies have very clear responsible marketing policies which state that they don't advertise to children. So there's a clear disconnect going on here between what's in marketing policies and then what's actually happening. So that is a misalignment there, which needs to be looked at. We also look within the report at how easy it is for low-income families to be able to access and afford healthy diets. So this draws heavily on our work as part of the Kids Food Guarantee programme. And what we were sort of looking specifically at here is whether, if families are having to trade down in terms of price, which we know many households have had to do over the past few years, does that also mean that they are then trading down in terms of kind of health and nutrition? There's still, I think, a lot more that can be done in this area. So I pulled out just one of the stats from this section of the report. So this was data that we published last week. So we've been tracking the price of first infant formula. And this is kind of a really key critical category for young kids, because if you're reliant or dependent on formula, there really are no other options there in terms of feeding your children. And yet what we find is that the most expensive first infant formula on the market is twice as expensive as the cheapest first infant formula. And that's despite formula being very tightly regulated for obvious reasons, so that all products are nutritionally comparable. So there's still a lot more that I think businesses can be looking to do to really ensure that they're supporting particularly low-income customers who we know are facing some quite big barriers to healthy and sustainable diets. I'll stop there. Back to you, Anna, and our brilliant panel.
Thank you, Rebecca, and congratulations on doing such a great job with the report. Great. We're going to have a chance now to hear from two businesses who are working hard behind the scenes to try and move the needle on some of these issues. So I'm really thrilled that we have Fran Haycock from Greencore and Julie Owst from Bidfood. Both are, their titles are Head of Sustainability, but I know they'll also touch on some of the health issues that we've been highlighting. So, and I would urge everybody to do continue to use the Q&A function on the webinar to put in questions, because we'll have an opportunity after we've heard from Fran and Julie to hear a little bit, to address some of the questions that you're raising. So do please continue to put some in, and thanks for those of you that have already. So Fran, we'll start with you. Thank you so much for joining us. So in Greencore, I know you've been doing a lot of work to try and get the data tracking sorted out. Can you tell us, I think in relation to both nutrition and health as well as net zero, can you tell us a little bit about what the challenges are that you've faced on that journey?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Anna, and hi everyone on the call. Thank you for having me on the panel. So yeah, data, topical. We've come a long way in 12 months, particularly the last 6, and that's kind of been helped by a couple of things. So capability and the central sustainability team has really helped us with that. So getting the right capability and the central team has been a huge help. We've set up something called the plan ownership model, which I think Anna's going to come to at some point, and I'll talk about that and how that's helped. And also kind of executive sponsorship of data, and really driving that in the last 6 months has been a key enabler for us. But so on some of the challenges, I think there's 3 things that have been a challenge for us primarily. So one of those is business capacity in the teams to kind of get under the skin of the data and get to know it. A lot of the data for the commercial teams, particularly the health data, has been kind of new and different, and it's been a hurdle to kind of get them in a space to engage with that data. And there's been a lot of manual work that we've had to do, particularly with our NPM scores. We've now got NPM scores for all of our products. That's been a huge and mammoth effort by our sales and commercial and product teams. So yeah, a huge thank you and kudos to them for that work. So we're now in a position to report against that, which we will be in a couple of weeks when our sustainability report is launched. So business capacity has been an issue. I think business ownership of the data too. So been on a big journey to kind of decentralize sustainability data and get that into the business. So getting the business to take ownership of that and accountability for that, particularly around the quality and the availability of the data, and treating it ultimately with the same discipline that we do for financial numbers. So, I mean, that's a multi-year journey for our business, and I'm sure every business, but how do we get the business to think about sustainability data the same way that they think about financial performance overall? And then finally, kind of our third-party relationships. So we haven't had capacity to really invest in those relationships deeply and lean into them, particularly on carbon, and lean into those relationships and capitalize on their experience. So again, having more resource in my team has helped us to strengthen those partnerships. And of course, every business has those third parties supporting on data, and it's incredibly important to invest in those. And we're finding great value from investing more in those. So those would be the 3 things, Anna, that were the primary challenges for us that we're working through and are making good progress on.
Thank you. Interesting point to say that trying to get people to treat this in the same way that they do the financial data. That's put your finger on something there, I think. I'm interested, is your board looking at these numbers in the way that they would the financial data?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, we're in a strong position where we've got a sustainability subcommittee of the board, and they meet twice a year. Actually, this year we met 3 times. And so, I mean, I think, yeah, it's a journey for all levels of management all the way through the business. But yeah, absolutely, the eyes are on the data. That the board, the subcommittee, have been driving this agenda really hard, really putting pressure on the executive team and me and the team to get it right. So, you know, that they are driving it, and the expectations on sustainability data are high. So that's helped us. Pressure always helps if you can channel it in the right way. So yes.
And So I understand that in terms of sort of how you've made this happen, you've really tried to embed sustainability in all parts of the business. Can you tell us why you've approached it like that and what impact you think that's having?
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, I'm really proud and passionate about the work that we've done in this space. Actually, it's been a real particular focus of mine since in the last 12 months. So where it came about initially was when I took leadership of the team. We restructured the team. I'm sure lots of businesses have been through this and lost some of the resource as a result, and that kind of forced me to think about it in a different way. And that's when I decided that we had to decentralize ownership. And that we needed to set up what we call the plan owner model. And I guess historically to that, as well as having the team restructured, we were trying to drive sustainability centrally and it wasn't working. And I think the business recognized that, and that's something that I needed to change. And so we set up the plan owner model, which is a model where we have executive ownership of our 3 strategic pillars. And we have a plan owner who is someone kind of middle management in the business who is leading each of our 10 topics that we have. And yeah, so our initial focus has been on people, really, people embedding, executive ownership, board ownership, and the plan owner model, which has been a massive enabler for us. And has helped us to decentralize sustainability into the business. And we've also been partnering with Future Food Movement in terms of upskilling board, the exec, and the plan owners specifically as well. I think the impact of that, I mean, we're starting to see significant value from that model. It's 12 months old now, maybe a bit heading towards 18 months. So, you know, big step change in ownership, business ownership and accountability. Big step change in business curiosity and motivation and excitement around it. And then ultimately I've seen a huge difference in momentum of us being able to drive those agendas and roadmaps, particularly on healthy and sustainable diets, which has really been with the commercial team now having data. I talked about the NPM scores, etc., that we've got now. That's really supercharged their motivation, their curiosity and ownership of the agenda. So further work to do on embedding. And then my focus in the next 12 months will be on process, a lot of kind of getting it into key processes, particularly in the product development process, which is where health comes into it. And then a continued focus on people embedding as well. So yeah, we're in a good place, more to do. And but yeah, it's been a worthwhile investment for us in the last 12 months.
Really interesting, Fran. I'm imagining that perhaps the plan owner model, when you start to embed these priorities within commercial teams, that you start to see they will start to spot where there are opportunities to deliver on both on commercial, health and environmental things kind of all at once, and those new insights will start to emerge, and you perhaps sort of sitting in the sustainability side wouldn't necessarily anticipate some of those. That's quite exciting potentially.
Yeah, and the more examples we get of that, we're starting to see some green shoots of where we're getting a health win, a planet win, and a commercial win too, right? Because obviously, you know, that's we call it the triple wins that we're after. So yeah, absolutely, we're in a good place with commercial. Lots more to do, but I think what I'm trying to drive in terms of embedding is a partnership model. So making sure my team are partnering with the business and supporting them and providing kind of expertise and guidance, but the business are leading it and driving it. So that's where we're heading.
Thanks, Fran. Julie, let's come to you. You're head of sustainability at Bidfood. I know you've made a huge amount of progress in recent months on disclosing around health and sustainability. I'm really keen to start with you telling us a little bit about what that disclosure process has sort of unlocked in the business in terms of thinking about different ways of doing things.
Yeah, sure. And thank you very much for having me on the panel. So from a wider perspective, it's really helped us. It's acted as the catalyst for us sharing quite a lot more information that we ordinarily wouldn't have done, not from a secrecy point of view, just because we not necessarily thinking people are interested in it, but it's been once you start reporting something, as you have already said, it's part of the first step in acting on it. So you were your Plating Up progress report was the catalyst for us sharing our food waste reduction data publicly, all the different percentages and the volumes, our percentage alignment with Living Wage Foundation rates. And the Plating Up progress scorecard generally acts as a bit of a kind of to-do list for our sustainability and nutrition team in terms of looking at what, it's really easy sometimes to be overwhelmed by the amount of things you've got to do, but having a kind of scorecard and looking at what's evaluated really can help kind of focus attention. And I would definitely say, honing in on the theme of healthy food, that the benchmarking exercise really accelerated our work on nutrition and healthier diets in terms of that internal dialogue and how we classify healthier, because I think we're all aware that there are a huge range of criteria as to how you classify healthy. We ended up going with the government high fat, salt, sugar labelling guidance. It's not a perfect approach, but it means some healthy foods are eliminated, such as oily fish, nuts, healthy fats, etc. It doesn't take fruit and veg, fibre into consideration, etc. But it's a good starting point, and we are continuing to explore ways of defining healthier products moving forward. I think it's really worth pointing out, though, as a wholesaler, we're in quite a challenging position because we can only really drive improvements if it's in an area that's meaningful for our sector. So we have a huge range of customers, ranging from more health conscious customers like schools, hospitals, prisons, care homes, and some of those sectors are kind of regulated in terms of the health requirements. But we also serve quick service restaurants, contract caterers, again in all different contexts, from business and industry to education sectors, pubs. So we have a wide range of customers with all different priorities. And one of the complexities is that people are looking for indulgence when they eat out. So we did a bit of work on this a while ago when we published a healthier range, and we advertised that these products were healthier, and the sales actually decreased because people are looking for indulgence when they eat out. They don't want to necessarily know that something's healthier. And I think if we're honest with ourselves as individuals, we can all relate to that. And I think it's similar to calories. I went into a restaurant, and because I'm interested in this, I live and breathe this. I saw that they had calories on the menu, and I asked them, what effect has this had, the fact that you're publicising calories on menus? And they said it's really interesting. You do hear people discussing them, but they said we had a group of men in the other day who interestingly wanted to maximise their value for money, and they were deliberately choosing the thing with the highest calories. So, in that instance, it's really challenging to influence people in the right way. And I think it's similar. I know you're not talking about carbon labelling, but people on cash-strapped budgets where eating out is about indulgence, treating yourself, sometimes going for the green traffic light and doing the right thing is not necessarily appealing when you think, I'm trying to be good all week, I just want to splash out, it's my treat. So I think in the wholesale sector it is challenging because people are eating out for a social occasion and to treat themselves. So it's reflected actually in a dialogue we had a customers a while back, because our strapline, we've changed our name a few times over the years. Our current strapline is inspired by you, but our old strapline used to be about us inspiring the industry in the way that we do food. And we had feedback from chefs saying, we're the creators, we're the creative ones. We don't want you to inspire us. You're there to provide the food, and we will do the magic. So we are in quite a difficult challenge that I think people often don't appreciate, because the food we're serving is kind of anonymous in large catering style packs. It's extremely cost conscious, and as a sustainability professional, I'm always pushing the sustainability objectives when it comes to buying food. But you've got customers trying to manage loads of conflicting objectives, whether it comes to allergens, managing allergen, that was a high priority. We recently did a survey on our customers to understand their priorities, and I was really hoping that sustainability would have moved up there, but actually they want our help in reducing their costs most of all, and that overshadows everything, all the other criteria, which is really frustrating because it's not what I want to hear. But when you look at reports as to how the hospitality sector is doing, lots of operators are operating at a loss. Some are struggling to break even. Not all are in profit. So I think it's a challenging one when we're trying to influence customers to do the right thing, because they are genuinely juggling quite a lot of criteria. Yes, we're trying to drive. Sorry, go on. Were you about to say something?
I was just going to say that leads very nicely onto the second question that I was going to put to you, because I think what you're describing really is how little wiggle room you have within the current cost restrictions, the economic incentives within the system, or how the economics of the system works. And so I think there's a question really about then, what do you see as the role of government for a business like you in the sort of wholesale space? Where can government intervention try and open that space a little bit more, so that it's less of a binding constraint essentially on you taking action?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because there is a general willingness in the business to do the right thing, but we're really scared of being uncompetitive, because the slightest addition on price can cause our customers, who are very cost conscious, to shift. So you're right, it's really important to drive this through legislation where possible, and get that support from government to do more. So we've been huge advocates of the Food Data Transparency Partnership. We've been part of the working groups. We've signed the open letter in favour of mandatory food waste reporting, because we want to raise the bar across the industry as a whole. So we want to be able to de-risk investment in sustainability, so that we can all move forward and we're not fearing losing sales. I think also, we've been talking to the Zero Carbon Forum about this, who facilitate discussions across the hospitality sector, that it would really help to have shared metrics for sustainability performance. Because at the moment, and I suppose your benchmarking report helps that in terms of helping compare apples with apples. But at the moment, even as a sustainability professional, if I look at the sustainability reports of different operators and suppliers in this sector, it is genuinely really challenging to know who is doing more in this area, because we're choosing which metrics to report against. We're not reporting against the same thing. And on a course I recently did, my sustainability masters, we were a group of about 40 odd professionals. We were all looking at different sustainability reports, and we were all creating our own criteria as to whether we thought they were doing all right or not. And even our judgments were widely different depending on what we were honing in on. So shared metrics for sustainability performance, so that you remove the sort of smoke and mirrors factor. And also, I just want to say that the range of reporting platforms is really challenging. It costs money to report against a platform, and all different sectors use different platforms. So actually and I know this is a common complaint for people working in my line of work, but we genuinely spend so much time reporting and chucking out data. We don't have the time to do the work in driving standards up. So anything that simplifies reporting and enables better decision making against things that really matter are things that I would really support. And a
Thanks,
point from
Julie.
my nutritionist. Oh, sorry, go on. Sorry.
I was just going to segue on. I'm conscious of time.
Yeah.
That's really, really useful. And it's very relevant to a question that we've had in the chat from Nick Hughes, who's asked, do you have any insight into the new government's commitment to take forward the FDTP, which seems to be really key in creating that level playing field? I don't know, Rebecca, whether you'd like to come in at this point and add to the comments made by Julie on the FDTP. You're on mute, Rebecca.
Sorry. Right. Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think, as I said, we were feeling very encouraged by the progress the FDTP had been making. I think, having that consistent and standardized set of metrics for everybody to report on is a really key part of, getting that basic building block of a better food system in place. You know, good data drives good decision making, but at the minute, you know, neither businesses or policymakers are in a position where you can make informed decisions about what to do to drive positive outcomes based on what data there is. Because you're kind of comparing apples with oranges and not everybody is even reporting in the first place. So it's been quite disappointing since basically, as far as we know, not much is happening with the FDDP. Progress seems to have stalled. And yet, you know, we know that there are actually a lot of businesses, you know, including Bidfood, that are very supportive of the FDDP. So in terms of kind of food policies that the government could look to act on kind of quickly, it would have a pretty soft landing with industry and unlock a whole host of different benefits. So, you know, we'd be very keen to see the FDDP resurrected and ideally put on a mandatory footing, which I think is key in ensuring that it's not just the same companies reporting that already do. You know, ideally that would happen pretty quickly and set the scene for the next 5 years of the term.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'd like to move to the really interesting question put by Rachel Crosley in the chat. So she's reflecting on this conversation about cost that you raised, Julie, and is saying in the medium term, don't you expect that moving both to renewable energy sources and more plant-based food and less meat-based product, that will actually reduce the cost of the food that you're supplying? Do you expect to see this win-win sort of on the horizon? I don't know, either Fran or Julie, whether you'd like to comment on that. Fran, shall I turn to you first?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, yeah, energy-wise, that makes sense for sure. Let's see how the energy market plays out. There's obviously a huge upfront investment in a lot of the energy work, so there's lots of different variables on energy to consider. It's a little bit complex, but on the plant side, it depends what ingredient it is. I mean, yeah, we're kind of early days working through that in terms of understanding the commercial impacts across volume and different SKUs and how that would work. So relatively early days, there's lots of exploratory work to do there, but you know, that's one of the things, that's the problem solving that we need to do to get that right. So it's a business commitment to get under the skin of it and understand the various impacts. Once we do, then we know what levers, I talk about levers a lot with the business, what levers we need to pull and how and when to do that. But yeah, ultimately that's the kind of outcome we're searching for. Yeah.
Fran, there's one more question in the chat that's directed at you. If you're able to just spend a second looking at that and seeing if you'd like to type an answer. And then I'd like to turn to you, Julie, for the really interesting question from Tracy, which is about Tracy McMahon, which is about food waste. So basically what she's sort of, I don't know if have you had a chance to read it? I won't repeat it and waste time, but if you'd like me to summarize it. Yeah, so it would be great to hear your reflections on that. Actually, maybe can everybody, maybe I should summarize for everybody else. I'm not sure if everyone else can see the question. So you're really asking about, she's asking about, there's so much waste in the food industry. Why can't we produce less, save money that way, reduce the amount going to waste and bring down costs so that we don't have such a big food poverty challenge, essentially?
I think it's a really valid point, and as someone that's personally very keen on avoiding food waste, it's kind of close to my heart about it. And you're right, it is crazy the inequality we have in this country, and the food industry problem with food waste is really challenging because, I mean, I used to work in the supply chain of a major supermarket, and their main KPI across everything was about the availability of food in store. So the availability across all food lines had to hover around 98, 99%, which means having full availability of all their different SKUs, no matter what the weather, no matter what else was going on. And the consequence of having full availability of all these different foods is that, say it's the weather changes, you've got a full barbecue range. You see it if you go into Tesco, Sainsbury's, all the major supermarkets. You see it. We had a rubbish summer, that all the barbecue food was there unsold, despite all the best sort of modelling and forecasting. Businesses don't want to waste money either. there are huge variations in consumer taste depending on the weather. I think it's really hard to contend with that. We have it in our industry as well, in terms of trying to gauge the food that we're selling into the tourist industry, and then people don't go for days out. A consequence of living in an economy where we have full availability for food across different climates, that's imported, that has long lead times. Sometimes we are used to having such good availability, but a side effect of that is waste. When I don't often think people realise the size of the food waste problem. Tracy clearly has, because you're raising that issue, but I don't think people think about this very much, actually, that good availability of food drives waste. And you see it, lots of our customers have a buffet food model. If you're arriving at a buffet at 1:45 and the buffet shuts at 2, you still expect a full buffet offering at 1:45 because the buffet shuts at 2. Therefore, you will have loads of food waste at 2 o'clock, because nobody can donate that to fair share. It's already open, it's spoiled, it's spilling open to the air. We can, we all have a responsibility in this. I think that, food for a long time has been seen wrongly as plentiful and cheap, and we do not pay the price for food. The price of food doesn't reflect its value. I could talk about this a lot, but I do think there are systemic issues in the availability and the KPIs that we operate to that drive problems in food waste.
Thank you, Julie. We've run out of time now, but I think it's interesting how strongly out of this, both the questions and your answers to them and the panel conversation, and indeed the content of the report, points to the challenges around aligning commercial and health and environmental goals, and therefore the need for the shifting of those commercial incentives within the system. That takes us quite quickly into the sort of fiscal realm. How do we make the healthy and the environmental choices that businesses make work commercially? That's the big challenge, and that's really where the role of policymakers needs to start. So watch this space. There's lots happening on the policy front at the moment. Let's hope that some new opportunities emerge for those conversations with government. But in the meantime, thank you both so much, Fran and Julie, for joining us today. It's been really valuable to hear your insights. Thank you to Rebecca and the team for doing such a brilliant job with the report and getting tons of media coverage, which is great to see the messages getting out there. And thanks everybody for joining us and your great questions, and look forward to reconnecting with you again soon. Oh, and finally, don't forget to sign up to the podcast and our newsletter, both of which you can do with the links in the chat. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.